hippies are my friends. Come along with me, see how the story ends.
Welcome back to another episode of Professional Hippies. And if you get tired of us saying welcome back, well, I'm sorry. It's because we love you. Today, we have a guest that we're excited to introduce you to, a compadre of mine, a fella that I think you're going to be really excited to hear from, none other than Taylor Max Ricart. Did I say your last name correctly?
Yes, you did.
I've never actually pronounced your last name.
No, you don't use it very much. There's no reason to.
Yeah. Well, hey, if you're new to our show, we like to bridge the gap between professionalism, and we're bringing you a professional on a silver platter today. I'll tell you about some of his accolades here in a minute. Or if you float a little bit more towards the woo, hey, we get you. So we want to kind of meet you somewhere in the middle and jam out right around there. Our episode today is brought to you by none other than Norspor. Hey, are you a budding, might I say, fruiting mycologist, amateur or pro? Norspor has just about everything you could want. One of the products I'm really excited to tell you about is this all-in-one bag they came out with. If you guys missed the episode when we had the owner of Norspor on, one of three, he teased this product. They just came out with it a week ago. It could not be easier to grow neuromedicine or functional mushrooms as well. So check out their site. I believe we'll drop a link in the description. If we don't have that already, we'll make sure we put that in the show notes, and you can head over to our Instagram and check out the other affiliates that we love. So getting back to the man of the hour, my brother, T-Max. That's what they call him on the streets. We met through Cutco, and he's an extremely high achiever. I did have him send over his bio because even though you're one of my best buddies and I've known you for far too long, he's one of the top producers in company history, has been inducted into the Cutco Hall of Fame, which is incredibly hard to do. You're talking 1 million plus reps. So in rare air there, has won a Rolex and also plays a very big part in a nonprofit in Haiti. So today we're going to steer the conversation kind of like a sailboat without a rudder. That sounds fun.
Let's do it.
Let's strap in, strap on, whatever you prefer. And how you doing,
I'm just glad to finally meet someone from the Hall of Fame, because I only just know you, Colton, from the Cutco Hall of Fame. So I'm like,
it must
be
to say like I'm not in the Hall of Fame. I was like, hey,
no,
man.
No, I know you're in the Hall of Fame
too.
But I was like, it must be pretty easy to get in there if you made it. And then I'm like, oh, now we got, okay, so there's somebody else that has made it in there. Got it. Cool.
And I don't know that you know the C-Max. I mean, Dylan through me and stuff, but Dylan actually used to be one of my customers.
Ah.
Yeah.
Is that how you guys met?
No, it was much more dark and twisted than that. Yeah,
for sure.
Yeah.
For sure.
That's an episode that should never air. But yeah, so we can start any which way. I think one of the things I was excited to get you on to talk about, and whatever is lighting your heart on fire at the moment, but this kind of, we're at the tail end of concluding a pretty big trip for you.
That is correct. Much longer one than I intended.
What would you anticipate? How long do you anticipate the trip going?
So I was intending to be back in Miami, which is where I'm from, by July 1st, the latest. Yeah. And it is now August something, and I am still away. So it didn't go quite as planned along the way. Yeah.
What would you say was the point where you decided, hey, I'm gonna keep this going? Like, when did that switch flip?
So I had my intention on this trip was to be on a little bit of a spiritual journey, self-discovery journey, working through some things in my life. And on my way to probably early June, so a month or so into my trip, I was cross-country road trip kind of style through from Miami all the way to California was the goal. Made it to about as far as Wyoming and ran into some road debris and just destroyed the car. That was quite an adventure. And that ended up taking over 2 months to get fixed. So I just picked up that car. It was closer to almost 2 months. Yeah. And so when that happened, I had a couple different decisions I could make, but I knew it was kind of the universe telling me like, hey, you've been on this trip now for well over a month and have not done a single thing that you intended to do. I think I was talking to a mutual friend of ours, Jason, and he's like, sounds like the hero's journey, man. Set off with an intention, face obstacles, back down, and then life just put something in your face that makes you make the decision. Is this, it was at that moment I could either go back without accomplishing any of the things I wanted to accomplish over the course of the summer, and arguably coming back in an even worse place than I may have been when I left, or I had to abandon my plans, which was actually a pretty substantial decision financially and otherwise for the business. And, just stay on the road trip until I found what I was looking for. So, when the universe sends you a sign like that, it was not an easy one to listen to, but I did decide to just stay.
And staying looked like moving.
Correct. So the plan was to go visit my family in Minnesota, then drive over a couple stops and go to California to visit some more friends, then come back and see you on the way back to Miami through Texas. But when the car broke down, I was like, oh, now what do I do? And
Breakdown's an interesting phrase of
that changes
literally.
That changes up the whole perspective. You said from Miami to California, but now you're like, you went to Minnesota and then going to California. Holy shit.
It was a lot of driving. I did North Carolina first, visit some family, my sister's graduation from Davidson, which was beautiful, and then Minnesota. And yes, I didn't break down. I destroyed it. To be more accurate, that is true. That was on me.
So what?
To
You were
quote
just
him,
driving? Bam.
when you get into an argument with the insurance company, not even an argument, actually, you guys are on the same side. You're like, no, total the car.
Yeah.
And they're like, no, we want to. We just have to figure out how to make that happen now. That's breaking down.
So a long story short of it, I have a Tesla and I hit some road debris, wrecked the bumper, the front windshield, and the roof. And I couldn't get a tow truck out to pick me up. It was in literally the middle of nowhere. I tried for multiple hours, but the car was still driving, so I drove it for 4 hours. Barely made it to the Tesla repair place. Like that 1 mile an hour, just coasted into the parking spot because the car, at first was driving and capping me at like 70, and then the screen turned off, so I didn't know how fast I was going, and then it would like cap me at 30 miles an hour. By the end, I was driving 15, probably the last 15 miles an hour on the side of the highway, just trying to get to this place. And so that's what caused the major damage. So the reason that the whole totaling happened was they repaired about $17,000 worth of repairs with the bumper and a bunch of other things that happened. And once they were $17,000 into the repair, they realized the battery was shot because I had cut one of the coolant lines and then drove the car for 4 hours without any coolant. So,
Okay, that makes sense.
That was why.
So it wasn't like the battery got punctured. It was the battery just didn't have what it needed.
Yeah.
It gave you its last ounce of life, sounds like.
It made it. So, that's why it was so delayed, and there was talks of totaling it, which would have been ideal, but they were already 17 grand into the repairs. So it was cheaper to put the other 20 grand in than total the car and lose the 17. So it was a $55,000 car. They did about $45,000 worth of repairs on the car.
Wow.
And thankfully it's driving great. You wouldn't even know.
Yeah, so riding in the car with him. That was the first time he let me drive it. That was the first time I've driven a Tesla. Have you driven a Tesla before, Dylan?
I haven't driven one. I've ridden in one.
Yeah. Yeah, I was
bought Tesla stock immediately after
that. Tesla stock is my largest holding.
Yeah.
I'm a fan.
That is a wild machine to just like, I don't know. He had me do the self-driving thing, and it's switching lanes, and forget about the fart noises. The fact that that's in the
public's hand is ridiculous. That piece of machinery is allowed.
I think it's slightly less ridiculous than the idea that we drive those machines every day. Like, once you get behind the wheel of a Tesla for a couple thousand miles on the highway with autopilot, you realize how much better computers are at driving than we are.
Well, you did run into
will
something.
Be, I should say. Will be, right? It will be better. It may not be there quite yet, but you can see it. You can see it.
It don't work well in Wyoming, though.
I will say that was user error. I can't put that one on Tesla. That was on me.
The AI has not made it out there yet.
Honestly, if I had been on autopilot, I probably would not have been in the accident to begin with. So, yeah, crazy.
Well, stuff happens. So, in total, how many miles has your trip been You know?
Driving wise, because I also, when that happened, I started flying around everywhere, right? So I
True.
visited a bunch of cities flying. But driving wise, maybe like I left with less than 1,000 miles on the car because I just bought it, right? I bought the car, I got the car delivered at the end of March, left on this trip the beginning of May. It had less than 1,000 miles on it when this happened, by the way. And right now I think I'm just over 4,000, so maybe 4,500. So I've driven about 3,500 miles with it on this trip. And there's more driving to come.
So
But when you're driving, I have to say, when you're driving on autopilot, it does not feel like you're driving. Like
Right.
it's the equivalent of when you first learned how to drive, and it requires all of your attention. You can think about nothing but what you're doing, right? And over time, that goes back, and your subconscious can handle it, and now your mind is totally free while you're driving.
To text.
Yes.
That was my next question. What were you doing during that time? So you're got 1,000 miles of autopilot.
By the way, this is not going to be a showcasing of how you could have made better decisions. I'm just curious.
Hey, the bad decisions are the ones we learn from the most. And if other people can learn from the mistakes so that they don't have to make them, all the better, right? And that's the beauty of the internet. We can learn from each other.
Right.
But yeah, so autopilot just takes it to another level where like that same gap, I would say it's almost the same, but like even more just mental freedom when you're driving. It's pretty crazy.
To answer your curiosity, Dylan, he thought it was engaged, reached in the back seat, looked up, realized a little too late.
It was not.
Oh, wow. So did it disengage on its own, or did you just forget you disengaged it?
I don't fully know. It definitely didn't disengage on its own. It was not engaged. And
because I've heard if you don't have your hands on the steering wheel, it'll disengage or something like that.
It won't disengage, but it'll tell you, hey, you're not paying attention, so you better pay attention. And if you don't, so if you fall asleep behind the wheel while the car is driving on its own, which has happened to many people. As a matter of fact, I was telling you, there was that guy that was had his car impounded because I got 3 tickets for sleeping behind the wheel of a Tesla. And the video is hilarious of the car, of the cop cars just following him for like a solid mile, honking at him, trying to get his attention. The guy's just knocked out in the front seat of the car. Don't recommend that. That was not great.
But it does point to a very promising future.
Absolutely.
I mean, all the time we spend behind a wheel driving, like I work from home and still it's like going to the gym or whatever. Like that's just kind of wasted time unless you're on a phone call with somebody or, like there's a lot of TikTok that you could consume.
Imagine Bonnaroo. You leave Bonnaroo, you could just put that sucker on autopilot out for the next 12 hours. That'd be beautiful.
That actually does. How does it work when, say, if you wanted to rent a Tesla through Turo, do they disable any of those features?
Often they will limit it to like 80 miles an hour, and different models have different levels of the self-driving. So depending on the model you're renting, you may or may not have access to the full self-driving.
Because Dylan, you just stumbled into a fantastic idea. I mean, leaving something like that.
If I had to pick, if I had any kind of lack of confidence in my ability, autopilot the whole way is substantially better. Especially on the expressway, right? We're talking mostly highway right now. Streets, it's not there.
But like the straight line shots, like Miami to Fort Myers or Sarasota kind of thing. That's that's what you want.
Where is it hanging?
It's not even straight shots. It's just because it'll switch from one expressway to another as well. So if you're on the highway and you're going to be on the highway for more than an hour, it's unbelievable.
Yeah.
Are you hanging in the left lane or is it in the middle or the right lane when it'll
change its own lane. So when I set the autopilot, let's say I set it at 70 miles an hour and I'm in the right lane, there's a car driving slow, it'll pass it up, go to the left lane, go past it, get back in the right lane, and continue at 70 miles an hour. It's pretty impressive.
So I just wish they sped up.
You were saying if you fell asleep, if you fell asleep at the wheel while you were on autopilot and didn't respond, the car will pull off to the side of the road. First off, you're asleep, it's going to wake you up. It makes some pretty loud noises, big red light flashes on the screen. And but if you don't respond, it'll slow down, pull over off the street, and put on the blinkers for you and try to wake you up some more.
Jeez.
Yeah.
Well, I could put that to the test for sure.
Don't test that with Dylan. So back to the the saga of that journey, right? So what would you say, reflecting at this point, what were some of the high point moments for you?
Low points are often the high points, right? So that accident, if that hadn't happened, I would have gotten none of the benefit out of the trip. I might have continued down that road of avoiding and distracting myself from my problems for the whole rest of that trip. So that was a real wake up call. And even though it was definitely one of the lowest moments of the trip, I wouldn't change it. Right. It was the reason that the trip has become as powerful. Everything that happened afterwards was because of that. So,
what was your deductible?
$500.
Yeah, that's worth it, right? $500.
Yeah.
So what was the point of the beginning of the journey? Like,
What was
I'm
the
trying to
point?
understand of the beginning of the journey. Yeah, because you're saying you didn't do the things that you were going to be doing up front, and then it changed into something else. But I'm curious what the point of the beginning of the whole journey was.
So before I left, I was moving out of my apartment in Miami, and I had to make some pretty challenging life decisions in a couple respects in terms of directions of where I wanted to go with my life. And I had been avoiding a lot of these for a while, and they'd kind of built up and become a little bit of an issue. So my intention was to spend quite a bit of time reflecting on these specific issues and journaling and planning and prepping them. But more importantly, I guess to really understand the trip, we kind of have to go back to the surgery because that's sort of where the whole thing started. So 2019, I ended up donating my kidney to one of our mutual friends, one of my closest people in the world. Another actual Cutco rep, one of the, I think, number 3 ever or something like that.
Something ridiculous.
So this is somebody that I have known for, at that point, 10 years almost, maybe 8. Yep, 8, 9 years. And I went into kidney failure. It's been, I know, a huge impact on your life, mine as well, and many.
I think I was 3rd or 4th in line for that kidney.
Yeah.
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 Pretty close counsel there.
It's crazy how many people there were in that line, huh?
Crazy how close I was.
Yeah. Well, when I originally agreed to get tested, so he went into kidney failure in December of 2018, and both the Cutco community as well as the nonprofit community, because he is the one that basically runs that nonprofit. He's not the owner or the president, vice president, but when he got sick, 46 people, I think it was, got tested to give him a kidney. And this is to put that in perspective, when we went to Jackson in Miami, which is one of the top places in the world to have a kidney transplant done, and presented this Excel sheet with 26 people, their blood type, and a bunch of other necessary information. They considered taking the case to social services to make sure he wasn't bribing or purchasing this, because they had never had somebody with this many potential donors. I think they said the most they had ever had was like 8 or 9. He had 46 people. And so, that was when I agreed. When I agreed to get tested, I was like, 46 people doing this. Like, what are the odds that it's going to be me, the one that lives the closest in the same city? Like, there's just, what are the odds, right?
You're like, I'm going to do this for good show. I won't.
I'm not going to lie. That was definitely a part of it. But real quick, within a week.
It's like weird. I was weird at a music festival one time, and I got caught by one of the bone marrow donors. And, I'm happy as a ray of sunshine. And they're like, do you want to sign up to save someone's life? I'm like, of course. And a year later, I got the call. They're like, hey, every year we have to check in, make sure you still want to be on this list. And I was like, look, I made that decision at a time where I didn't fully understand. And had I needed to, I would have fallen through. But like, can I not be
that
on the
marrow's
list?
full of acid for sure. You don't want any of that.
I'm not gonna lie, I do remember a couple conversations about concerns over the quality of your kidney early on there.
No, those were had very upfront and through the process.
Oh, was it?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
I wasn't sure how involved.
That might have been why I got bumped down a couple notches.
It may have been.
Sure.
They looked at it like, ooh.
Yeah.
It looks like a raisin.
We should revisit that conversation I had about specifically drug use with the
We call them medicines.
medicines.
No, we call it drugs.
Medicines and drugs. They're all the same thing.
Yeah.
The medical system was not the most impressive going through that process, I will say. Made it hard to want to take their advice because of how I felt like behind and poor it was a lot of times, especially from the nutritionist. It was crazy.
Yeah.
When I was going through the interview process, so I quickly was in like the 8 people that were real potential matches.
Right.
And then I think out of those 8, about 6 of them went through more in-depth testing. 3 of us went through like the deepest, full everything testing.
Mm-hmm.
And out of the 3, I was the closest match.
You told me, I think you were like closer than like a lot of times brothers have the
Mm-hmm.
possibility of being.
They were really surprised. They're like, you guys are closer than most siblings genetically in the main markers that we're looking for.
Yeah.
That's
Which
wild.
I think, looking back on our history, like family history is not super surprising. I
Mhm.
can see how there might be some overlap.
Sure.
But
Inbreeding.
I don't know about that.
Okay. I'm just checking in.
Actually, I think both of our families are pretty diverse
All right. Yeah.
in a lot of ways.
That's the way I talk about my family too,
Yeah.
from the South. Like, actually, third cousins.
I was going to say, sometimes you expand to second, third cousins. Yeah, there's real diverse over there.
Yeah.
Colton and I are from the Panhandle. We're related somewhere in there.
Yeah. Yeah.
If they
It's
don't
probably
say
that
go
Cutco
Bama, we
breeding
ain't
for
rolling
sure.
with them.
It's definitely that Cutco breeding. That's exactly what that is.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Moving on.
So yeah, I was one of the 3 that went through the testing, and I actually told him. I don't know if you know this, but like the night before we found out the results, we didn't know exactly when the results were going to be. I'm like, listen, if it comes down to it, because the other 2 people were actually like excited to do this, right? Like they could not, they
Fired up.
were hoping for it,
Right.
like they were in. You know
Yeah.
both, right? Kim and
Yep.
Justin. And I was not, right? Like, I mean, if it was only me,
Sure.
it would be an easier decision. There's 46 people, you know?
Right.
So when it came down to the 3, I'm like, listen, in the place I am in my life, like if anybody is even remotely the same and it comes down to 2, do not choose me. Like, I can't.
Pretty strong statement. Not a lot to mix up there.
Yeah. And I remember his face, and we talked about this like way later. He's like, that was one of the hardest things I've ever had to hear, you know?
Yeah.
And he responded, how else can you respond, right? It's
Sure.
like, of course, absolutely.
Right.
But that was pretty crazy. And then the next day in the morning, I had been listening to this series on Netflix. It's awesome, with Morgan Freeman, called God. Excellent little docuseries kind of thing, and Morgan Freeman's awesome. But I have been listening to that a couple of different episodes over the last couple months, and one of the things that just came back to me, I was driving down the road, had nothing on my mind in particular, wasn't necessarily thinking about the surgery, and I see these just gorgeous birds fly by. And it was, with exception of actually giving the kidney, one of the most spiritual moments I've ever had in my life. And I don't think I've had very many transcendent moments like that. Certainly not, in terms of direction of my life that way. So what came to my mind was just something that they were talking about in the show, that like birds don't fly through the air, they're carried by the wind, and fish don't swim through the water, they flow with the currents. And the universe is pushing you in a certain direction. And when you flow with it versus against it, it's going to take you where you want to go a lot faster, right? And being in tune to that and understanding how everything works together. And that just came to my mind as I saw those birds coming by, and right away it was just like, everything is saying I need to do this, like it's going to be me, and I need to step up and get this done. So I went to the store and I bought a little like stuffed kidney. And it was actually, was it on Andy's birthday? Yes, I think it was on his birthday. I gave it to him that morning in a bag. And I'm like, it's me, and it's yours. This was like 24 hours after I told him, absolutely, do not choose me. So that was pretty crazy. And then later that day, we found out it was me. And I was like, damn, okay, let's do this. But it was important that I made that decision before I knew, right? Because I think if I had waited to find out the results, I might not have had the courage to take that extra step. Because Justin was really close as well, like better than the average kidney donor by a lot.
Mm-hmm.
They were fairly close genetically too. So that was crazy.
So leaning from that into the genesis of your trip, right? Because that's kind of taking back context for, I think, what is setting up for.
Yeah. So at that time in my life, 2018 was a really dark year for me in a lot of ways, financially in particular with the business, and a lot of personal struggle, lack of clarity as to where I wanted to go or what I wanted to do. And this gave me there was no time to think about anything else. I made this decision in March. I donated the kidney in April, right?
Wow.
The timeline doesn't seem right to me, but it's close like that
Sure.
anyways. So, I gave him, so that decision, those next couple months were incredible. I was not in a very good financial place at all. I had a lot of debt. And I basically spoke to Andy and said, the only way I'm going to feel really good about this, because I'm not going to be able to work for 4 months afterwards either, right? Is if I can work between now and the surgery. And I know it must have been January, end of January, because in 2 months I made enough money to pay off my $30-something thousand worth of debt that I had at the time. And for the first time in my life was debt free. And I did it in like 2.5, 3 months.
Mm-hmm.
When I had been trying to get out of this debt for like 4 or 5 years, right? And it's just crazy when you have an external motivation commitment like this that is just doesn't get much more real than getting cut open, having a party, taking out and putting somebody else, right?
Right.
Like that's up there with the most crazy experiences you can have. And that changed my life. Like, the fact that I was able to do that so quickly and experience for the first time like a not fear of money or lack of, or it changed my relationship with money in a lot of ways, because I realized, like, if I did that in 2 months, what can I do in 2 years, 3 years, if I have the intention behind it. So that changed my life in a lot of ways. And the following 4 years were crazy. I knew that making that decision and deciding to do that, it was going to be a 2-year process, because I wasn't going to just give him the kidney and ride out and go, right? I wanted to make sure that everything was good and help him and support him as much as I could to make sure that this thing sticks.
Right.
It is not uncommon for that to not go well, regardless of the quality of the match. As a matter of fact, the day that we had the surgery, which we ended up doing on my birthday, April 22nd, crazy. And there was another gentleman who had been waiting for a kidney for like over a year on the transplant list, had the surgery right after us, and was in the same room as Andy. And man, the joy when somebody's life is saved like that, because, he was not going to make it to the end of the year if he didn't get this kidney. Fast forward to about a week later, when Andy's being discharged, he was told that the kidney didn't take and he wasn't going to be able to get another one. Right. So that was an intense moment, because we had kind of gone on this journey, even though it was just a couple days together, like surgery same day, recovery in the same room, same nurses. And now to know that the odds of him making it without finding a live voluntary donor to do the procedure again was very, very low. So that moment, I remember that and being like, this is not over yet.
Yeah.
This is just the start of another journey now. So the next couple years, next year or two was really around health, wellness for myself, for him, restructuring my life financially a little bit from the lessons I had learned from that. And then COVID hit, right? And with COVID, because of the fear of the kidney and the lack of an immune system and the immune system being hurt, I was locked down for that whole time, pretty solid. So really quick, my life went from crappy to amazing to like 4 years of this. I had 4 years of COVID. I think that's the easiest way to explain it, right? Mm-hmm. That just totally changed the trajectory of my life. And I have come out of this experience now a different person than I was when I came in. And this trip was largely about figuring out how to integrate those two things, right? Like the person I was, the person I am, and then figuring out who I want to be and where I want to go. Because I have spent the last 4 years not much thinking about my future or my development, but much more either repairing the mistakes of my past, structuring my life, working on other things, and being very present, which was actually a beautiful thing, but not building for the future the way I had been prior to this. And everything I had planned and thought about and wanted for my life before is drastically different. So I had invested a lot of time in my 20s, and thinking about my future and what I wanted. And now those 4 years changed who I am, and I need to refigure out where I want to go and what I want to do. And so that was a big part of the genesis of this trip, was to try to get some of that clarity and figure out what's next.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks for tuning in, guys. That was, fucking
Wow.
Yeah, some heavy stuff, but it's beautiful.
That was heavy. And it's interesting that you, I don't know, the best way I can kind of describe what it sounds like you did with your journey is like, people go on vacation to get away from work for a little while. It just sounded like you were like, I need a vacation from life for a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
I need to just take a step back and just rethink things. And I think that's beautiful that you did that. I think a lot of people don't do that because they let a lot of other things get in the way. And it sounded like you had all these goals, and then you were like, I got to put the goals on hold for a little while.
Well, the hardest decision I had to make, and I'm sure people are faced with this type of decision from time to time, is, July is an incredibly important month in my business from a revenue and sales perspective. It's something I've worked very hard to build over 10 years. It's, in a way, a big part of my pride and joy of what I do. And it's a big sale that I run, but I also do a variety of different like live events for it as well with clients.
He still gets my customer texts and chews up the pennies, responding with gifts. You know what those cost us. Yeah, it's pretty annoying. I've tried taking them off like 5 different times, and he still sends me old grandmother saying, "What?"
Love it. So that decision to extend the trip and not go back and do that was very difficult because it was a big financial sacrifice.
Sure.
But I just knew, I'm like, if I go back, I'm going to fall right back into the same routine. It's going to be another year before I have a chance like this to do what I want. And so that was a big sacrifice. And I think when you have those hard choices to make, the harder the choice, the more committed you are to what you choose to do, right? Because that was a huge sacrifice. And now I could not continue the trip the way I had and not take advantage of the time that I had just created for myself and honor what I wanted, because now I'm not just sacrificing something I had planned and prepared to sacrifice. I am like, this is a big chunk of money I'm giving up, and time and energy. And, I knew that would make me do the things I needed to do.
Yeah, it's almost like that sacrifice, that price being paid.
Mm-hmm.
Once you've sunk that cost, then it opens up all of the possibility. It's like when you had that first moment you invested in a big time coach or go to a conference or like anything like that. You're like, all right, well, I already paid to be here. I might as well soak it in.
Absolutely.
So
and you never appreciate as much what you get for free.
Never.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like it's not just like pain that drives that. It's sacrifice, right? Like it doesn't necessarily have to be painful, but there has to be a giving up for some part of it to come in, I suppose.
It's the whole idea of sacrifice in general, right?
So it sounds like in a lot of ways you kind of took a step back to recalibrate for the steps forward.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So, man.
And how's your health?
Really impactful stuff.
My health.
How's your
great.
health? Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks for asking. And if there's anybody that's considering possibly being a kidney donor or knows somebody that is in need of a kidney, I would say that the information out there, I'd love to write a book on this one day because there's not enough out there about the experience of the donor. And really, like, obviously the doctors don't know me that well because they say I'm a normal person from a health perspective. And I think that's only from a physical and health perspective. Sure. But I have no medicines I need to be on long term, no limitations. The biggest drawback when you do donate a kidney, which there's a huge percentage of the population that is born with one kidney and may not even ever know. Not
really?
Huge, but it's bigger than you would think. I think
what percentage would you say?
I think it's somewhere around like 20 or 10 to 20%.
Really? Mm-hmm. So like, is that like low functioning to basically one's just not working?
No, they're born with one instead of two.
What?
Mm-hmm.
How about that?
I could be completely wrong about the percentage.
Sure.
But that is what is in my head for whatever reason.
Yeah.
And it's not an issue for most people, right? Unless they have other conditions.
Yeah, because we kicked it and had a couple beers over the last couple of days. And, that was the thing. I was curious, like, are there any recommendations when it comes to stuff like that? Like, what did
So the recommendations were hilarious when I met with there's a pretty in-depth process when you go decide to do something like this, including a psychological analysis to make sure that you're doing this with sound mind, right? Mm-hmm. Pretty deep. And one of the parts of the process is meeting with a nutritionist who kind of prepares you for it. But the advice that I got from that nutritionist was, I don't know how she could say some of those things with a straight face. And it wasn't bad advice, right? But it shows you the standard that the average American is at. The type of advice I got was let's try to keep the fast food to once or twice a week. Okay, you don't want to overdo it with the fast food. Okay?
Right. Only one Kentucky Fried Chicken per week.
Exactly.
Right.
Yes. Like and a lot of more preventative as opposed to like this is what you should do to optimize your health. It's
Right.
like avoid doing these things. I'm like, I already don't do those things.
Sure.
What else you got for me? How about, and I ask specific questions, you know,
Supplements.
like supplements, whey protein versus like regular,
Yeah.
you know, vegetarian versus working on nothing.
Mm.
Nothing. That was wild to me. So from a health perspective, yeah, I mean, there wasn't much. The first 6 months, you got to be real careful. You know, you're on some pain meds afterwards. You definitely are not drinking for a while. I didn't drink. Had my first drink 6 months after the surgery. It was a glass of wine, maybe 2. But I didn't drink much for the following year or 2.
Mm-hmm.
And I definitely drink less than I would have before.
Right.
But in terms of like how my body processes it, it's pretty fine.
Hmm. Yeah, so there's not really any difference, essentially.
As a matter of fact, the average kidney donor, this is a crazy fact that I know is true. The average kidney donor has a higher kidney function than the average American does. And the reason is they actually take care of their kidney. They hydrate. Most Americans actually have pretty poor kidney function in comparison to what it could be. The average kidney donor has a higher kidney function. And my kidney function, I haven't had it tested in a while, but basically what happens when you give up a kidney is the other kidney physically grows to compensate for it.
Mm-hmm.
So when you first give up the kidney, your body is in shock and your kidney function is shot. Right. And over those first year, your kidney physically grows and they contract roughly your percentage. So after the kidney, I think I was at 20 something, 30% kidney function, maybe a little higher. And by the time I was tested the last time, I was at 80%, which is on the high end of recovery. Most people recover 70%, which is more than enough to live.
Mm-hmm.
And I was already up over 80. So it's a pretty crazy. The body's a very durable thing.
Yeah. That was something I definitely took away from that is, and the recipient, it lives with 3 kidneys.
Ideally, yeah.
Yeah.
Unless something happens, they have to remove the other ones.
Mm.
Mm-hmm. Which may end up happening with him at some point, but that's dependent on the disease and a lot of other things.
Dylan, we don't have a side bet, but I'm wondering between the two of us who's going to need a kidney transplant. Like, you know, not that I would want yours, but...
Well, I'm out of kidneys.
Yeah,
so.
Your spare tires are left in Wyoming.
You're on your own.
I would give it up, but I don't think they'd look at my chart and be like, "How are you alive, man?" I don't even.
So the nutritionist. The other interesting thing that came up was obviously like they asked about drug use, and although I had been obviously leading up to the surgery very good, I have a history with that. And so that was actually directly with the nephrologist, and which is the kidney doctor. And she saw my hesitation to answer some of those questions. And so she looked at me, looked outside, she's like, no cocaine in the last year. And she listed a separate set of requirements, right? And she's like, mushrooms fine as long as it's not current, regular, or often. We don't really care that much about psychedelics. It's cocaine, heroin, hard stuff, oxy, the things that people become dependent on that you may end up being dependent on afterwards.
Sure.
Right. The ones that could have damaged your kidney or other body functions that maybe we don't see on the test because you've been good for the last year, but is this going to come back and hurt you later?
Scarring, right? Etc.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So that I thought was really interesting. And that was obviously like an off-book question, right? So you just check no on all the boxes on the paper, but...
I had a very similar interview.
Did you?
Yeah.
For the kidney?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
I thought that was later in the process for me.
I guess that's where I was.
No,
I didn't meet with the nephrologist.
Right.
But there was paperwork being filled out, and
so on that paperwork, I had said no to everything. But there's multiple stages where they ask you the same question.
For sure.
Right.
Yeah.
And so this one, they kind of went through everything again in person, live, and I think they want to see your reaction to the question, not just what you wrote on the paper.
Right. Yeah.
It was actually really challenging also with the social worker to make sure that I, wanted to do this and was not getting a car or something as a reward later, even if it wasn't cash. Like very poignant questions. That was intense. But it was cool.
How often, I wonder, is that a thing that people are selling their kidney instead of it being donated? I wonder, just so people can jump up the list to get a kidney.
There's a huge black market for it. Not so much in the US, but yeah, definitely available. And less money than you might think.
What would you say coming out of this? What do you feel like currently? Because this is a bit of a loaded question. What do you feel you're looking forward to
in life?
What's exciting for you right now?
Freedom. Freedom's always number one, right? Number one goal, building towards that, enjoying the process a lot more. I'm at a phase in my life, and I think this is probably pretty relatable for a lot of 30-year-olds, where I kind of figured out a little bit more who I am and who, more importantly, who I'm not, right? So I would never want to go back to those early 20s, as much fun as they were, with the amount of insecurity that you have in yourself, right? So in addition to that, I think I've also kind of gotten the financial side of life a little bit more under control. And that was such a huge thing I've carried from my childhood of fear and uncertainty. So for the first time, I'm like working out of a place of confidence and joy and abundance, as opposed to like fear and scarcity and uncertainty. And that alone is what I'm most excited about, is to spend more time working in that energy, whatever I'm working on, whatever I'm building, but being intentional about staying in that mindset and not allowing myself to fall back into fear as I'm building new things or establishing, new programs and stuff in my business. So that is, I'm looking forward to continue to build towards financial and personal freedom, as well as enjoying that process more, being intentional about having fun as I'm building it.
Yeah. It sounds like a lot of these lessons have kind of been catalyzed in the last 4 months or so. Like I can hear the intentionality behind, like sometimes things are intuitive, right? Like sometimes we just learn lessons and integrate them into who we are, but we don't verbalize them or take the time to sit down, journal them out, reflect on them, and see what the path is that we want. Like what's serving, what's not. What's the path that we want those gifts to continue forward, and what gifts aren't serving at this junction in life anymore.
Yeah, I think we spend a lot of time sometimes, and in your 20s, you have to acquire a lot of knowledge, right? So you got to invest a lot of time in there. But people fall into this habit of like mental masturbation when it comes to that kind of thing. I love that term because it's, when I heard it for the first time, I'm like, oh shit, that's exactly what I'm doing. Right? It
sticks, right? It's visceral and it sticks.
It's real.
It's accurate.
Yeah. And I don't think it's a terrible thing if you're in a bad place to lean into that, to change the way you're thinking and put the good inputs into your brain again.
Yeah.
But once you've consumed enough of that content, it's like, what are you implementing? Right. And I've always felt, particularly over the last 2 or 3 years, that like I have a lot of the answers that I want, and I don't have the confidence or the presence to access that knowledge and implement it in my life correctly. And I think that was a big part of this trip. Like I didn't want to do any personal growth or reading, or like that was not even on the radar. It was about getting the knowledge I already knew I had, the things I already knew I wanted, but I was suppressing in myself. And that plan moving forward and how to do it, I knew that my instincts and the knowledge base I've built over the last 10 years, I had everything I needed to get to wherever I decide I want to go. And there's nothing I'm going to read in a book that's going to change that directly now. It's more about how can I access and get clarity to what I know I have and want, as opposed to looking for validation or more information out external. Just accessing the information I had internally already. We don't spend enough time doing that, I don't think.
Taking space. Right. The answer is like the wisdom's always within. That's a mantra that kind of comes up frequently, and when I'm on trips or journeys. And
what are the most powerful lessons you've learned through tripping or this? I think most of them can be distilled to something simple that you already knew before, right? It's just you embody it in a different way. You hear that information at a different time, and now it resonates differently. But the lesson's the same as what you knew when you were 15 or 20 or whatever. It's just. Yeah.
So we typically ask this question at the end, and I'm not ready to land the plane just yet, but I am curious about, Dylan, do you feel it's appropriate to bring this in?
Oh, yeah.
All right. What's something you wish more people asked you about?
I wish people would ask me more why I'm so generous. I since I was young, people have always said I was a generous person, a giving person, a loving person. In my 20s, I found that like I take so much pleasure in giving in whatever capacity. I really love giving gifts. It's like a new thing that in my 20s I had the financial ability to do, and like I take so much pleasure in that. The kidney, I mean, it came from a generous place for sure, but it wasn't something I had ever planned or wanted. That was way beyond anything I thought in terms of my capacity as generous. But it's something that people point out about me a lot as they get to know me, and they rarely ask me why I am that way or how I became that way. And I wish more people were that way. So, I'm still figuring it out. And sometimes I've definitely been too generous or too giving, and it's come back to bite me in the butt. But I'd much rather have that than change that part of me.
What's your favorite thing to gift?
I'm not going to lie. The knives are pretty cool to gift.
Yeah.
Like, still, I just recently gave it to an old college friend who got married. And man, the reaction is just so over the moon.
Right.
I also love giving like super extra things, right? Things you would never even like. It's just ridiculous. Why would you even own that? Like a towel warmer, right? Or I don't know, what else would fall into that category? Just even if it's not a high ticket item, but something that is like way more expensive than that, you would probably never spend that on it because you can get the same thing for like a little less or quite a bit less. And yeah, it's not as fancy or as pretty, but it's just as functional. So why would you spend the extra?
Right.
But when you spend the extra, it's nice,
There's one thing I've come to appreciate about you. It's the extra.
I do like the extras.
Dylan's the same way. I guess I'm covering a theme of my best friends here. Is that it's the why not attitude.
Life gives you a choice. Choose both, man.
Yeah.
Choose the why not.
Choose the why not. So as we're kind of coming into the final stretch here, I think one thing that I wanted to pry out of you the most was...
Well, before we move on to that,
yeah.
I didn't really say why I'm so generous.
Okay. Give the people what they're after, man. Why are you so generous? Why are you such a loving soul that bestows your gift upon God's green earth?
I think people are missing out on a lot of the joys of giving, man. Like, even in my business, a big part of what I'm building now is gifting the knives through a more corporate setting.
Mm-hmm.
And the reaction that these business owners get when they're giving their employees a $100 knife, not necessarily in lieu of their $100 bonus, maybe in addition to, maybe out of just the blue, like the energy that creates for them to then come back and tell me, or for the client to call me directly, the one that they gave the gift to, is like, holy crap, it's so amazing, give me more.
Mm-hmm.
It's so I do love gifting that for sure, and it gets a huge response. But yeah, people are missing out on like the joy of giving and being generous, and it's maybe I'm a little different where I take an extra level of pleasure and fulfillment in doing that, but it is a common human experience to, appreciate and enjoy when you're able to support or help somebody, whether it's financially or personally. And people don't lean into that enough. They don't. And the more you do it, it's like anything else. Like you just find more love in it. And anything that you give, you will get back 10, 20, 30 fold if it's given from a place of no expectations, right?
Yeah.
So much of my success that I've received in life, in business, even like the kidney was just a clear example. One of the things that came from it, I did not do that kidney there was no amount of money that would have convinced me to give a kidney or anything, right? It was solely about saving him. But a bunch of people got together and, heard about the situation. And after I got the transplant, they gave me 10 grand. Just a group of friends and family from the circles that all donated to GoFundMe and gave me $10,000 to help pay for all the expenses during the next couple months and anything else that would come up. So I went from January being 30, maybe even 40 grand in the hole, 35 grand actually, to being 10 grand positive at the end of April, right?
Yeah.
Like what a shift. And
Some could say that was kidney worth what, 40? I'm not a social worker, okay? I'm not saying...
But that kidney has paid dividends, that I would never have imagined, right? Like what that's brought into my life. And that's the biggest example. So it's obviously big and clear, but you do that on a small scale and the results are going to speak for themselves. It's remarkable the way it changes the way people interact with you.
Yeah.
And it's worth the one or two jerks you run along the way that don't appreciate or take advantage of that. I don't even focus on it. It's such a small amount of them, right? Most people, if you're generous to them, they're going to want to be double the generous back when they have the opportunity.
Yeah. I think that's
I think you should definitely write that book, by the way, about that. That sounds like an incredible journey that I think maybe a lot of people in that state that you were in before you had that journey or that experience that you had before you were in your car where you were really fearful. You're like, I don't really want to do this. I don't know. Just listening to you, if I ever, it made me feel comfortable if I ever needed to do it. And so you were saying there's not much out there for people to kind of look up. There might be like doctors and stuff, I'm sure, to give you medical advice, but that personal advice, I think that book would really come in handy for a lot of people out there.
Yeah. True Confessions of a Kidney Donor. 2039. The release date.
Oh, we got to that up a little bit. Well, I just want to take the time to tell you, you definitely have a story worth getting out there. And I appreciate you coming on our platform and us giving you the ability to share that with the world. It's been incredible being your friend, but also I can totally vouch for the way that you've shown up to the world. It's better for having you in it.
Thank you.
Well, Dylan, you got anything else for the man?
No. Thanks for what you did for your buddy. I'm sure he's doing really great, and I'm sure a lot of people are going to hear this and might be going through the same thing or appreciate that you're sharing your story.
And if somebody wants to connect with you, maybe they're going through something similar or just want to reach out, is there a channel where they could find you?
TaylorMax.com. That has all my contact info. You can reach out to me directly. Not a huge social media guy, most active on Facebook, but you might not hear back from me right away if you reach out there.
Best way to get in touch with you is probably place an order, right? Might get a faster response.
You may get a faster response. Yeah.
Well, hey, if there's somebody out there that you feel like could benefit from this episode, we mean it sincerely. I know we say it week in, week out, but I think this week was especially impactful. Please share it with them. If you made it this far and you feel so inclined, leave us a review. That means we'll show up on your algorithm more often, and we deeply appreciate it. Till next week, guys. We love you.